She was a retired school teacher, 71 years old. She'd spent 32 years teaching fourth grade in Pittsburgh, math, reading, how to be decent. She had a small house in the north side, a cat named Walter, and $14,000 in savings she'd been putting away since 1987. One phone call, that's all it took. A calm, professional voice, a man who knew her full name, her address, the last four digits of her bank card. He said he was from the bank, said someone was trying to drain her account, said she needed to act fast to protect everything she'd saved. She transferred the money 3 times because she trusted him. And that voice, that calm, professional, utterly convincing voice, was being read from a script. In an office building, 15 minutes from her front door. This is the story of how Detective Alex Donahue found that office, and what he discovered inside it. Pittsburgh in February doesn't apologize for itself. The sky sits low and gray like a lid pressed down on the city, the Monongahela River throws cold wind through every gap in your jacket, and the streets stay slick from the ice that never fully melts between storms. Detective Alex Donahue pulled his Navy Crown Victoria onto Grad Street at 8 in the morning and sat for a moment before getting out. He chewed his toothpick and stared at the precinct building, yellowish concrete, metal windows fogged with condensation, the American flag snapping hard in the wind. Somewhere behind the building, a generator was growling. The grid had been unstable for 2 weeks. He'd learned to trust the feeling he got when a day was going to be bad. Not a premonition, just pattern recognition. The kind you develop after 18 years on the job. The Cyber Crimes Unit occupied a small room on the 3rd floor. 4 desks, 2 monitors, a coffee maker that had been broken since November. Victoria Nash was already at her desk when he came in. She wore her hair pulled back and had the look of someone who'd slept 2 hours less than everyone else but compensated with processing speed. Victoria said, "New complaint came in overnight. North Side. Retired teacher, 71 years old. Dorothy Caldwell. She goes by Dot." Donahue took off his jacket and hung it on the chair. He said, "Bank security scam?" Victoria said. Almost word for word the same script as the others. They called her Cell, identified themselves as First National Security Department, said suspicious activity was flagged on her account, said she needed to move her money to a protected account immediately. She transferred $14,000. In 3 separate transactions over 2 hours, Donahue moved his toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other. He said, "How many does this make?" Victoria said, 27 in 3 months, just in Allegheny County. But we have strong reason to believe the same network is operating in Ohio and West Virginia. He picked up the thin folder from the edge of his desk. First page, a photograph of Dorothy Caldwell. A woman with a kind face, laugh lines around her eyes, hair set the way women of her generation kept it. She was looking at the camera with the expression of someone who still couldn't quite believe what had happened to her. That morning, they went to see her. Dot Caldwell lived in a red brick row house on Foreland Street in the north side. The elevator in her building hadn't worked since Christmas. Donahue and his partner Andrew Cole climbed the stairs. Cole talked about a Steelers game the whole way up. Donahue didn't listen. Her apartment smelled like fresh coffee and mothballs. She met them at the door in an apron, wiping her hands, and led them to the kitchen. She said, "I'm not stupid. I want you to know that first. I know people think, oh, an old woman, easy target. But I taught school for 32 years. I'm not slow." Donahue said, "We don't think that at all, Mrs. Caldwell." She said, "He knew things. My full name, my address, the last 4 digits of my card number. He knew my account balance within $200. Tell me how a scammer knows your bank balance." It was a fair question, a very fair question. Donahue said, "Can I see the phone he called from?" She got up and came back with an old Samsung scratched screen, the case held together with a rubber band. She set it on the table. He looked at the number, standard Pittsburgh area code. He photographed it and texted it to Victoria. Dot said, "My daughter says I should have known better. That I was foolish." Her voice was level, not tearful, just flat in the way voices get when shame sits on top of grief and neither one has anywhere to go. Donahue set the phone on the table. He said, "Mrs. Caldwell, you're not foolish. These people are trained professionals. This is their full-time job. Our job is to find them." He said it evenly, no drama. And as they walked back down the dark stairwell, he wasn't thinking about the case. He was thinking about his mother. She was 66, lived alone in Bethel Park, and he hadn't called her in 9 days. Victoria had the first lead by noon. The number that called Dot Caldwell was registered to a ghost, a James Petronelli of Monessen, Pennsylvania, who according to Social Security records had died 14 months earlier. A dead man's SIM card, standard. But Victoria didn't stop there. She pulled all 27 numbers used in the Allegheny County cases. 18 of them traced back to a single point of purchase, a small cell phone shop on Penn Avenue in Garfield. Multiple transactions, all SIM cards activated at the same time. Victoria said they were buying them in batches, 6 to 8 per month. Same shop, same register, same employee. And here's the thing, all activations were pinged from the same location. Donahue said, "Where?" She turned the monitor toward him. "Map of Pittsburgh. North side. Red dot," Victoria said. "Oak Tower Business Park. Brighton Road, north side. 4th floor offices." Donahue stood and moved closer to the screen. Glass front building, Oak Tower sign above the entrance. Parking lot, maybe 30 spots. He said, "Who's in those offices?" Victoria said, 3 registered tenants, a law firm, a staffing agency, and Prime Connect LLC, listed as marketing and telemarketing services. Donahue moved his toothpick. He said, "Telemarketing." Victoria said, "Licensed." "Tax-paying." "Active website." "Reviews on Indeed from former operators." He knew this was exactly what a well-covered operation looked like. They didn't hide in basements. They rented office space, paid quarterly taxes, kept a LinkedIn page. They looked like a real business because in the eyes of the state, they were a real business, right up until they weren't. That evening, Donahue drove alone to Brighton Road, left the Crown Vic a block back and walked. The cold had dropped to 17 degrees. Wind off the Ohio River. Oak Tower Business Park was lit from the inside. 4th floor, the blinds were open. Silhouettes at desks, headsets, a lot of them. Donahue stood on the opposite sidewalk and counted. At least 20 workstations. This wasn't a small operation. This was a factory. He took out his phone and photographed the building. Then he called Victoria. He said, "We need a search warrant. And we need to do this clean, every document in order before we move." Victoria said, "Already working on the affidavit. But there's something else. I found a Prime Connect flyer. They were dropping them in mailboxes in Shadyside last month. Coupon offer, phone number for inquiries. That number matches the pattern of every number used in the scam calls." Donahue stared at the glowing 4th floor windows. He said, "Get everything together. Tomorrow we go to the DA." The DA signed the warrant 4 days later. 4 days is a long time when you know exactly where to look. But Donahue had learned a long time ago not to fight process. Process was what made a case hold up in court instead of getting thrown out on a technicality. The raid was set for Tuesday, 6 a.m. 3 teams, Donahue lead. He arrived on Brighton Road at 5:45. Cole was already there, sitting in his car with a thermos of coffee. He handed Donahue a cup without saying anything, which was the most useful thing Cole had done all week. They entered the building at 6 sharp. The security guard at the desk stood up with a look that said he already knew why they were there. Papers. Explanation. Calm. Professional. 4th floor. The door to Prime Connect LLC was unlocked, just resting in the frame. Donahue knocked, waited 3 seconds, then opened it. The office was empty. Not empty of furniture, the desks were there, the chairs were there, the headsets were still hanging on their hooks. But every piece of paper was gone. Every hard drive had been pulled from its housing, the cables dangled from the towers like cut wires. One drawer was open and tipped forward, the contents cleared. Cole whispered, "They burned it." Donahue didn't answer. He stood in the center of the room and felt the cold that is in temperature. The cold that comes when you understand that someone knew. He moved slowly between the desks. The forensics team was documenting everything, photographs, measurements, chain of custody for every surface. Donahue walked and looked and let something nag at him. He stopped at the last desk by the window, crouched down. Underneath the desktop, taped to the frame with 2 pieces of black electrical tape, a USB drive. Blue plastic, generic, the kind you can buy at any drugstore for $6. He called the tech over. Then he went to the window. From here he could see the parking lot. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, and there were tire tracks in it, multiple sets, a few hours old at most. Someone had been loading and leaving in the dark. He called Victoria. He said, "They cleared out, but they left a drive. Could be nothing, could be everything." Victoria said, "Or it could be intentional." Pause. He said, "Pull the access list for the warrant?" "The DA's office, our unit, the registrar. Nobody else should have known the timing." Silence on the line. Victoria said, "Alex, I found something in the business registration for Prime Connect. The owner of record is Russell Sherwood, 48. But there's a second name on the LLC formation documents. No criminal record, clean background, last name, Donahue." He went still. He said quietly, "First name," Victoria said, "Marcus. Marcus Allen Donahue. 18 years old. Address on file, Brighton Heights." That was his sister's address. Marcus, his nephew. His sister had bought that apartment in Brighton Heights 2 years ago. Took out a second mortgage, so Marcus could have his own place while he went to community college. And Marcus Donahue's name was on the formation documents of a criminal enterprise. Donahue walked out of the office into the hallway. closed the door behind him, stood with his back against the cold wall and breathed. Once. And again. Marcus Donahue lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Perrysville Avenue in Brighton Heights. His mother, Donahue's sister Diane, had co-signed the lease. Marcus was in his second year at CCAC, studying information technology. Donahue went that evening, alone. No badge on his belt, no jacket with police on the back, jeans and a coat. A family visit. He rang the bell. Marcus opened the door and went pale immediately. He had Diane's features, dark hair, sharp jaw, but his eyes right now had the look of an animal caught in a space it couldn't get out of. Donahue said, "Let me in." Marcus stepped back. The apartment was small. Kitchen barely fit a table and 2 chairs. Donahue sat. Marcus stood against the wall. Donahue said, "Tell me about Prime Connect." Marcus looked at the floor. Donahue said, "Marcus, your name is on the documents. I already know you were there. Better it comes from you now than from a public defender later." Long silence. Then Marcus looked up. He said, "I didn't know. Not at first. They told me it was standard telemarketing. Outbound calls for bank products, credit cards, insurance add-ons, $200 a shift plus commission. I thought it was legit." Donahue said, "When did you find out it wasn't?" Marcus pressed his hands together on the table. He said, "About a month in. They gave me a new script. Different language, fraud alert, temporary account freeze, secure transfer. I asked the floor supervisor and he said it was a compliance thing. New bank regulations, don't worry about it. I worked 3 more shifts with that script. Then I quit." Donahue said, "You quit, and you didn't report it." Marcus said nothing. Donahue said, Marcus said quietly, "Because Sherwood called me into his office the day after I handed in my notice. He told me my name was on the LLC filing. Told me if I went to the police, I'd be listed as a co-founder of a fraud operation. He said he had documentation that made it look like I was one of the organizers. He said he'd use it." Donahue looked at him. The kid was scared. Genuinely scared, not performing it. Donahue said, "Are you willing to make a formal statement?" Marcus looked up. He said, "Will you promise me I won't be charged?" And here was the moment. Donahue knew what the honest answer was. He knew he couldn't promise anything. That wasn't how it worked. That wasn't within his authority. He also knew that he was looking at an 18-year-old kid who had been set up, manipulated, and then kept quiet through fear. He thought about Dorothy Caldwell and her rubber-banded Samsung. He thought about the 947 names in whatever database was on that USB drive. Donahue said, "I can't promise you won't be looked at. What I can promise is that if you tell the truth, all of it, I will do everything I have the authority to do to make sure you're treated as a witness, not a suspect. But you have to give me everything." Marcus stared at the table for a long moment. Then he nodded. The USB drive from under the desk turned out to be exactly what they needed. Victoria opened it that night in an isolated forensic environment. Database file. 947 names, phone numbers, addresses, sorted by what the spreadsheet labeled trust score. Next to each name, amounts. Total across all entries, $2,140,000. And then there was the audio file, 47 minutes long. A man's voice, calm, measured, almost warm, walking a room full of people through exactly how to do what they did. How to establish trust in the first 30 seconds. How to handle objections. How to deploy urgency without triggering suspicion. How to keep the mark on the phone while they navigate their banking app. It was a training session, a masterclass in fraud. Victoria ran the voice through the department's audio analysis software, Russell Sherwood. Now they just needed to find him. Sherwood hadn't left the city. That was his mistake. Donahue suspected he believed his connections would protect him, or that the evidence wouldn't be enough. He'd seen it before. Men who've operated above consequences for long enough start to feel like consequence doesn't apply to them. Victoria tracked him through ATM withdrawals. Small amounts rotating locations, trying not to leave a pattern. But patterns are stubborn. He kept coming back to the same ATM, corner of Liberty Avenue and Heron, in the East Liberty neighborhood. Every Tuesday evening, between 7 and 8 p.m., Donahue decided to meet him alone, not with a tactical team, not with marked units, just him and the cold. Tuesday, 7:15. Temperature 12 degrees, wind chill -3. Donahue stood behind a bus shelter on the opposite side of the street and waited. Sherwood arrived at 7:22. Dark wool overcoat, leather briefcase, a flat cap. He looked like a downtown accountant on his way home from the office, unhurried, composed. Donahue came off the curb when Sherwood inserted his card. He said, "Mr. Sherwood." Sherwood turned. His face stayed level, only his eyes adjusted, narrowing for just a moment. Sherwood said, "I think you've got the wrong person." Donahue said, "Detective Donahue, Cyber Crimes. I think you know why I'm here." Sherwood pulled his card from the ATM, looked left and right. The sidewalk was empty. Then he looked back at Donahue with the particular calm of a man who has always believed he's the smartest person in any room. Sherwood said, "I'd like to call my attorney." Donahue said, "You can call your attorney at the precinct. Right now you can come with me on your own. Or I call the team and we do this with lights on the street. Your choice. 5 seconds." Sherwood assessed the situation the way a man does when he's calculating odds. Then he nodded. In the car, Sherwood was quiet for most of the ride. Then, almost to himself, he said something. He said, "You know your nephew signed those documents. If you think I'm going to sit in a room and not mention that, you're wrong." Donahue kept his eyes on the road and said nothing, but something tightened in his chest, because Sherwood had just confirmed that he knew about Marcus, and he was already preparing to use it. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Sherwood said almost nothing without his attorney present. He was careful, controlled, and infuriating in a particular way that people are who have done this before and know exactly where the lines are. But he'd made one mistake. When the contents were cataloged at booking, there was, among the folders and business cards and a folded copy of the Post-Gazette, a yellow legal pad in a hardcover. Sherwood apparently trusted paper more than digital records. The forensics team photographed every page. Victoria matched the entries against the USB database, names, dates, dollar amounts written in neat small print with a blue pen. The match rate was 93%. That was the last piece, but the final turn came from somewhere no one expected. On one page of the legal pad, circled in ink with the letter K next to it, was a name Victoria didn't recognize. She ran it through the system. She found Donahue at his desk when he got back from getting coffee. She said, "The name with the circle and the K. I ran it. It's not related to Prime Connect directly." He said, "Then what is it?" She said slowly, "Keith Calloway, senior investigator, Allegheny County District Attorney's Office. He's the one who processed our search warrant request. That was where the leak came from. Not someone in their unit, not a court clerk. The DA's office." Calloway had been taking money from Sherwood. His name and payout amounts were in the legal pad. When the warrant application came across his desk, he picked up the phone. One call. That's all it took. By that evening, the case had been expanded. The FBI joined. What had started as a local cyber fraud investigation was now a federal case involving corruption in the prosecutor's office. Sherwood was charged on 9 counts. Calloway was placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges. Marcus was formally designated a cooperating witness. The judge reviewed all materials and agreed. Marcus had removed himself from the operation upon understanding its nature, had provided voluntary testimony, and had not participated in the fraud itself. He would not be charged. Diane called Donahue a week later. Long pause. Then she said, "You could have protected him differently." Donahue was at his desk, looking out the window. February was finally starting to break. The cold was still there, but something in the light had changed. The particular quality of late winter sun that makes you think spring is actually a real thing that comes back. He said, "I did protect him, just not the way you wanted me to." She hung up. Donahue put the phone down, pulled a fresh toothpick from the cup on his desk. The old one had gone soft. Opened the folder in front of him. New case, new photograph. Another face with kind eyes and a look of disbelief. He started reading. Sherwood was held without bail. Calloway surrendered his credentials and was arrested the following Monday. The database of 947 victims was transferred to the DA's Financial Crimes Division for restitution proceedings. The frozen assets, accounts, real estate, LLCs, amounted to approximately $1.8 million. Some of it would be recovered, probably not all of it, but some. Dorothy Caldwell received a letter from the Pittsburgh Cyber Crimes Unit notifying her that charges had been filed and the case was proceeding to federal prosecution. She called the direct line that Victoria had given her, technically against department policy. When Donahue picked up, she said, "I want you to know something. When it happened, I didn't cry. I was too embarrassed to cry. But I'm crying a little now, because it turns out there are people who do the right thing." Donahue sat at his desk and listened. Then he said, "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Caldwell," and he put the phone down. Outside his window, Pittsburgh was coming out of February the way it always does, slowly, grudgingly, but coming out. The rivers were still steel gray. The hills were still brown. But somewhere in the light, something had shifted, and Detective Alex Donahue opened the next folder. RCF Not. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, organizations, and events in this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental.